One of the best dramas on TV that I've seen recently is Mussolini, Son of the Century, a truly disturbing drama that really speaks to our times, because what it shows is how strong men, and we're seeing plenty of those all over the world in politics, take power with a combination of parliamentary procedure, playing the democratic system while combining that with street-based violence and thuggery and using the police and the armed forces as well. With Mussolini, we see the architect of fascism, because it really was Mussolini who developed fascism as an ideology and as a practical form of politics. He established the first full-on fascist dictatorship by a proper definition of what fascism really is. And we kind of see the mental process going on in his head, the tensions, the contradictions play out through Mussolini, Son of the Century. We see him almost trying to figure out who and what he is and what his party is and how it's going to change Italy. He goes from being a socialist up until the First World War, and then he basically comes out in support of the war. Most people on the left opposed it. And that begins a journey from socialism to kind of ultranationalism and populism, which are, of course, ideologies we're very familiar with today. Mussolini starts out anti-capitalist, anti-clerical, that's anti-Catholic, anti-establishment, but ends up being basically pro-church, pro-capitalist, pro-landlord, and utterly reactionary. In fact, he kind of revels in the fact that he's become a full-blown reactionary. And we see in the drama the kind of top-hatted members of the bourgeoisie coming to Mussolini and saying, okay, we can see what and who you are now with your black-shirted thugs, with your transformation from revolutionary to reactionary, and now we want to use you as a hammer against those who've taken over the factories and the land. So Mussolini becomes, if you want, a kind of hired thug of the bourgeoisie and of the landlord classes. So we see Mussolini veering between violence and parliamentary procedure. When elections seem to work, he's all about elections. But when he's not getting the votes, then he veers back towards street-based violence. So we see fascist parties doing this throughout history, right up to the present day, combining parliamentary procedure with violence according to which is working. Now, of course, there are hotheads within the fascist ranks who don't always understand what Mussolini is thinking. I'm not sure Mussolini understands what Mussolini is thinking all the time, but when he veers towards respectability, they resent this. They carry out random acts of violence. They sometimes have to be slapped down. A similar thing happened with Hitler with the brown shirts, where he literally had to annihilate a whole wing of his party in the Night of the Long Knives in order to convince the establishment, the ruling class, that the Nazis were a safe proposition. And so we see Mussolini slapping down the radicals, the hotheads within the fascist ranks. What I find really fascinating as well is the way in which the fascists glorify violence in a similar way to the violent wing of anarchism. The anarchists were very active at this time in the 1920s when Mussolini was rising to power. They were carrying out assassinations and bomb throwing. They killed several heads of state, including President McKinley, for example, in the United States, and the President of France and the King of Italy and so on. And they glorified what they call the propaganda of the deed. And we see a similar glorification of violence with the fascists. The only difference is the anarchists were trying to abolish the state, whereas the fascists were trying to create a much stronger and militarized state. The other thing that I found fascinating in this drama series was the way in which we see the fascist party becoming embedded in the state, that the black shirts, that the military wing of the fascists become a kind of state militia. And there is this kind of uneasy tension between if you want, the bourgeois capitalist state and this up-and-coming fascist party. But the lesson for our own time is that it doesn't take very long for Mussolini to subvert the state, for Mussolini to use the traditional levers of power allied to violence on the streets to take full control of Italy. And at one point, he looks at the camera and says sarcastically in English, "Make Italy great again." It's a bit on the nose, but you get what he's meaning. Unfortunately, this drama series on Mussolini is very timely for us today. I'm not saying necessarily that Donald Trump, for example, is a fascist, but we are getting to a stage where we seem to be transitioning on the political right to something that begins to look like fascism. We're seeing the subversion of the state, of the institutions of democracy. We're seeing the bullying of the media. We're seeing the inappropriate use of the police and the military. We're seeing the creation of extra parliamentary groups, bodies of people who can inflict violence at a whim. And so I think it's very important for us to be aware of what fascism is as created by Mussolini, and how it poses a threat to the future of our democracy, and how we could almost transition effortlessly to a fascist state. I'd like to know what you think of Mussolini's Son of the Century. I approached this drama series with trepidation, but my God, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. People who said it was a bit slow are just not getting it, because it really was important to see the process mapped out, how Mussolini took power. It doesn't matter that we don't go into the Second World War or the 1930s. What's really interesting at the phase of history that we're in now is how he took power, because that's what we need to learn from right now. Please send me your views.